We are live again. Sorry about what happened before. This is Ennis from Never Stop Trucking. We had some issues here on our end with the live stream, and we are back. We are gonna have to talk to Jeff using our phones. Hey, Jeff, sorry about that.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
All right. Uh, so we are gonna have to do it this way, but we will talk about pricing, about load pricing in today's live stream with an experienced freight broker. I'll do a introduction for him, and then he can tell a little bit about himself. His name is Jeff Ashcraft, and he is with Spin Transportation. They have multiple locations in United States, and they work with all kinds of floats. And I'm showing Jeff right now. I'm showing your website here. What you guys do as far as the I see some oversized loads, some flatbed loads. Is that correct?
Yeah, we do open air trailers, everything from hot shots to legal loads and over dimensional, high, wide, and heavy. Probably the biggest piece on there is 90 feet long and 22 feet wide, and that was actually the structure that went on top of a rooms to go store, and those required police escorts. They only went 4 or 5 miles. Within Florida, but we had police escorts. It took us 4 nights to move that job. So anything and everything, mostly in that open air flatbed trailer. A lot of hot shots, a lot of legal loads though.
Okay. Well, we do work with flatbeds as well, but we're trying to stay away from the ones that require permits or escorts, because for me, honestly, I don't have much experience with that. Is that something that's hard to do? Is it time consuming to prepare all of that?
Well, it is. I mean, from a standpoint of getting the permits, it's not that difficult. I mean, there's permitting services around the country, and unless it's something crazy big, they call it a super load. But if it's a normal legal a normal flatbed that might be 10 foot wide or 12 foot wide, their standard issue. The cost of permits about, and it varies by state, but a good rule of thumb is about $50 per state for a permit. And they're issued within an hour normally. So if you get into the things that are overweight and very the wider, the taller, the heavier, the longer, the more expensive it is, the more expertise you need, and the harder it is to get permits. But as long as it's not what they call a super load, which is I guess if you think about anything less over 14 or 15 feet wide or under 14 feet tall, you kind of get into normal, easy stuff. If it gets bigger, then you've got to get and again, it all varies by state. Each state has their own requirements, but the wider it is, the more escorts you have to have. The taller it is, the more escorts you have to have, and sometimes you have to have what they call a route survey, which you actually have an escort service go out and drive that route, physically drive it, and measure to make sure that the trailer with the piece on it loaded, that the trailer loaded will go where you need it to go. And if it can't, they're responsible for finding a route that the piece can move on.
Okay, yeah. To me, it sounds like you would have to have some prior training on how to do that, because it would be very tough to find out everything by yourself. Because we did have a couple of owner operators and who were trying to make us book some of those loads, and I would always hesitate a lot because I just didn't want to. I didn't want to do something wrong, right? And I wanted to make sure before I do something like that I'm familiar with all those permits and all the requirements. Because some of the owner operators, they think, well, it's just like, let's just put an overdimensional load on the trailer and then we'll get a permit and that's it. No, I there is a lot more to it.
Yeah, there is. In fact, I tell you, last week or 2 weeks ago, there was it went around the internet. A trailer, an overdimensional trailer, got caught on because it was so low to the ground. It was trying to go over a railroad track in West Texas, and the hump of the railroad track made the trailer get stuck on top of the railroad tracks, and it got sideswiped by a train. And I think there was some people killed in that. Certainly a train derailed, but I believe that there was 2 or 3 people killed in that derailment.
Oh,
And there's things that should have been, and in my mind, when I looked at that video, it really relied, the fault of that was, first of all, the route survey. They would, if had they done the proper route survey, they would have known that dip was there. The permits would also specify where that trailer can go, and they were probably off route. And that is really the responsibility of the driver, but also on that escort, because that driver had an escort, and the escort's job is to be thinking about the load and the safety and being able to get that truck through there. And I put a lot of the blame on that one, on that escort service.
yeah. So it comes a lot to pre-planning. Now it makes me even more hesitant to do anything like that.
Well, I'll tell you what, it does get you out of the normal day to day. It makes you think, and it exercises your brain a little bit, and it takes some more time, but it's all just, it's crossing the I's or crossing the T's and dotting the I's, making sure you're planning out in advance. It's definitely doable though for a driver. But I would not suggest that a driver that's never done an overdimensional load start out with one that's 16 feet wide though.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, it's not just the driver; it's actually the company that they are hauling for. They are also supposed to, the dispatcher and the safety. They're supposed to figure it all out as well.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. Well, today we wanted to talk about pricing, and you sent me some slides for van, reefer, and flatbed. We'll start with van, and then if we have time down the road, and if you guys have any questions down the road during this live stream, if you want to ask Jeff about load pricing, the way it works as far as the customers go, the shippers, and the carriers as well, you're more than welcome to do it. We'll try to answer some of those questions later down the stream. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna share.
Well, you don't even need to turn it on yet. I've got some other stuff I want to talk about before we put that map up. But just a little bit about me. I didn't dream about being in the trucking business. That is for sure. I've been doing it since I started in 1994, working for a company called Burlington Motor Carriers, which at that time was a 3,300 truck fleet operating out of central Indiana. They were the third largest fleet. We had operations around the country, but I really started out with them. I did a little bit of brokerage for them, but I really got into load planning, dispatching, and then ultimately into a sales role for that company. From there, and that company's long gone. The Burlington Northern Railroad decided many years ago that they thought all the easy money was in trucking, so they bought 4 or 5 pretty successful regional companies and put them all together and made one really crappy company out of it. So, but it is what it is, I guess. But from there, I went to I was one of the helped start the operation for night transportation in Indianapolis. My mentor, who was the CEO at Burlington, hired me to help him do that, and we started that operation with basically from 1 truck and grew it to about 175 trucks over the course of a couple of years. That was a very profitable operation. That was really the second operation that Knight had outside of Phoenix, Arizona, where they're based. But that was many trucks ago. They had, I believe, 450 trucks when we started that operation total. So, a good sized company by any stretch, but nowhere near what they are today. My friend also, when he left Knight, he bought a company in northern Indiana called Heiner Transport. Was with him for a couple years there. Then I really got into the brokerage business in 2000, and that's what I've done since when I moved to Dallas in 2000, 2001 actually. I've had a number of roles. I worked for some of the big boys. I worked for some of the small boys. It was the branch president for XPO, was VP of sales for what is now Mode Transportation, both very large brokers. Um, uh, Honestly, and then I got done training and consulting, but I got tired of dealing with corporate non-compete, and so I started my own company, Spin Transportation, about 3 years ago. So that gives you a little bit of background on kind of who I am. Um, I look at, I think being a truck driver is one of the most difficult jobs in the world. But truly believe that. I can't imagine. I can't imagine that doing that. It's just very. My hats off to every man and woman that can do that and balance life. Um, but I want to talk today a little bit about pricing, because I've used to do kind of brokerage seminars on how to start to become a broker or an agent, and I would do a 1 week class on that. And everybody had two questions, and these were classes that were geared towards people that were already in the trucking business that wanted to expand into brokerage, or that wanted to learn sales skills, or that didn't have any background in trucking at all. But everybody had two questions. What are the magic words to say to get a customer? And I'll tell you, there are no magic words to say to get a customer. In fact, if there were, I would have already said them, and I'd be living next door to Bill Gates. I'd be living next door to Bill Gates. But the other thing that they want to know is, how do you figure out the pricing? And I've had, and I've said this statement enough times that I can always look out in my group and know who the people that were drivers or who had trucking experience, because I would tell them automatically that the price of trucking has nothing to do with the cost of operating your truck. And they would look at me with a blank stare, and they would say, "Oh, you're wrong." But I know that I'm not, because it really doesn't have anything to do with how much it operates, with what it costs you to operate the truck. And well, I guess the reason is, I can give you an example that's really obvious. And those of you that have trucked in the Midwest and East Coast, if you pick up a van load in Chicago and go to New Jersey, you're going to get somewhere in that $2.50 to $3 a mile range. But if you're going from New Jersey back to Chicago, you're going on the same roads, the same number of miles, you're buying fuel at the same fuel stops, you're eating at the same Subway, you're paying the same tolls. Everything is the same. Your cost of operation is the same, but instead of getting $2.50 or $3 a mile, you're getting $1.50 a mile. And the reason is because of supply and demand. It is all about supply and demand. I'm going to give you. I was a BC student at best, and I was, even as a high school student, I hated school, but as a senior in high school, I sat through it. I had to take an economics class, and my favorite teacher, Larry Nix, talked about supply and demand, and I thought, what are we? I don't need this. Why am I learning this? I'm not going to. Supply and demand doesn't do anything for me. So let's talk about and then I went to college, and instead of getting taught by Mr. Nix, I got taught by some guy from a foreign country that I could barely understand. And he was talking about supply and demand. I thought, are you kidding me? I learned about this crap when I was in high school. I'm never going to use it. So, say the least, I got a C in that class, because I was pretty much tuned the guy out. But then fast forward 30 years, guess what I use every day? Supply and demand. It touches everything that I do. So let's talk about supply, kind of pricing theory. And I didn't write this, but it kind of struck home when I read it. It was a pretty good way to explain it. So I'm just going to read this to you. It says, a long established economic principle is that any price of any good or service is a function of the supply and demand for it. Like many children, my daughter collected Beanie Babies. Beanie Babies are little bears that were about 6 inches tall that when I met my wife 25 or 26 years ago, these things were going hot and heavy. My wife would come home from work and say, "Hey, I'm going to leave for work early tomorrow because I'm stopping by the Hallmark store because they're holding a Beanie Baby for me. I said, what are these Beanie Babies you're talking about? She said, well, there's these cute little bears, and they're $7 or $8, but sometimes they're worth $40 or $50. And then she would say, look up eBay. And I said, what's eBay? And it's an internet auction site. So she showed me what eBay was, and I looked on eBay, and these stupid bears that my kids wanted were $40 and $50 a piece, and sometimes $200 a piece. So that's what these little bears are. They're little collectible bears. So like many children, my daughter collected Beanie Babies. Beanies became so popular that the stores could not keep up with the demand for them. Frequently, you cannot find the latest and greatest beanies in stores. And like many parents, I resorted to purchasing the store from the toys from scalpers at high prices. During the craze, I can remember my daughter calculating her fortune in beanies on internet auction sites. After a while, people began to lose interest in beanies, and you could buy them anywhere at suggested retail. The manufacturer, however, kept producing the toys after the frenzy was over, and supply began to exceed the demand, forcing the stores to sell the beanies at a discount. I ended up selling part of our collection really cheap at a garage sale, like 25 cents. I had a bag of these damn things that we sold for 25 cents a piece.
Right.
The way in which
Do you mind if I interrupt you just for a second?
Nope, not at all.
So these bears, what if the manufacturer was forced to sell them for less than what they use, to produce them? What would happen then? Because that's kind of like what happens, in trucking industry, like especially right now.
Yep, it is, and there's other forces going on right now that causes the rates to be low. I mean, I think there's a lot of people there's a lot of truckers that made pretty good money during, over the last, let's say, ending about 2 years ago. They had a 2 or 3 year stretch where they were really making money, and hopefully they stashed some of that. There was some economic incentives going on because of COVID. And some of these people are still holding on to that. I believe that the rates are finally starting to increase. There's the same amount of freight out there, but there's, unfortunately, for good or bad, there's been enough small trucking companies and bigger trucking companies go out of business over the last year that the prices are starting to increase. And I see that even on the consistent business that I have. I see drivers, if I have to go to a new carrier, trying to get more money. So I think the rates are creeping up, not fast enough, but they are creeping up.
Yeah, I would agree that they're slowly coming up. Well, see, from a shipper's perspective and from a freight broker's perspective, it's a lot about demand and supply, and I totally understand that. But from carrier's perspective, is more about the price of operations. So the way we see it, I understand that it's not the load prices are based, and that's the theme of this live stream. They're based on supply and demand and a lot of other factors as well. But from the way we see it is that. And I always take this as an example. You go to a Best Buy, you want to buy a TV, and I don't go out and tell Best Buy, hey, you should sell me this TV. They have their set price based on a lot of other factors, and they want to have some profit too. So I feel like maybe we should have some saying in what we can price our services for, so at least we can have some profit.
I think that you can, right? I think that you can. If you look at it from the other side, from the shipper's standpoint, if they have an option, one carrier offers them offers to move the load for $800, and another one offers it for $900. If their service levels are similar, they're going to go with the $800 one. So it is about the market function, the functionality. And I've always, before I was in the trucking business, I was in the car business, and that was my dream as a kid, was to own a Toyota dealership. And I did that for 5 or 6 years before I got into trucking. And I always said in the car business, there was an ass for every seat. That ugly car that nobody wants, if the price is right, somebody's going to want that that ugly car in the ugly color. So it's kind of the same. Freight's kind of the same way. It's all the supply and demand evens itself out in the pricing. Yeah, you can just hold firm. But I think the right way to manage it is to stay in lanes and pre-plan. From a carrier standpoint, don't try to be, if you're a one-man carrier or a 2 or 3 man carrier, I would say man or woman, truck, 2 or 3 truck carrier, you can't be everything to everybody. You need to find a lane and run that lane so that you can build relationships. When I was at night, we ran Indianapolis and Chicago to Eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Southern New England. That's all we did. And we ran, when we had one truck, we did that. And when we had 150 or 175 trucks, that's all we did out of that operation. And what that allowed us to do was build relationships with shippers and with brokers that would load us and we could give them consistent availability of trucks and consistent service, and our drivers got home.
Right.
So,
Okay.
So that was really what you wanted. Instead of kind of scattering 3 trucks across the country, stay regional and focus on one lane where you can build relationships and find the brokers that have better freight, that pay better. I know that I'm probably I've got a customer in Houston I probably overpay for, and I'm okay with that because I'm making a fair profit. I know that I pay higher than I should because I know what other people are paying on similar loads, and yet I'm okay paying for the service because the drivers that I use do a good job for me. They take care of my customer, and I know that I'm paying a good rate because I've had them tell me that I pay higher rates than most other brokers. So it's finding that freight, and by staying in a lane, I don't care wherever you live. If you live in Arizona, run between Arizona and California. Don't run from Arizona to Utah and Utah to North Carolina and North Carolina to Florida and Florida to Minnesota. There's no consistency there. But if all you do is run between Arizona and California, there is some consistency there. You are able to find those brokers and shippers that actually have freight that are willing to pay a little bit better rate. And it's not, the difference between a good rate and a marginally crappy rate is 10 or 15 cents a mile. It's not all the money in the world, but it's finding that broker that's willing to give you an extra 15 or 20 or 25 cents a mile that kind of makes the difference in how much money you take home to your family.
Yeah, it does. It does definitely. Are you ready to switch to those slides?
Well, I want to talk about. Nope, I'm not. So let's talk about freight.
Okay.
Freight rates are a function of supply and demand for them in a particular area. So it's how many trucks are available in an area versus how much freight there is. So geographic areas with a high volume of shippers, think the upper Midwest. Geographic areas with a lot of shippers have a higher demand for trucks to haul the freight. And so in those head haul, we call it a head haul. In those head haul areas when there's more freight than there is trucks, shippers are willing to pay a premium. On the flip side, some geographic areas have more consumers rather than producers. Think New York City. There's 15 million people that live within 50 miles of New York City. There's a lot of stuff coming out of there, but there's way more inbound. All the bottled water, all the furniture, all that stuff. There's no pig farms in New York City, and there's no cornfields in the Bronx. There's people. There's a lot of stuff that goes into the East Coast to support life. But there's not enough outbound to cover up all those trucks. So in those areas, the rates are cheap. So let's talk about that. So now pull up your maps,
Okay.
if you would, and we're going to talk about vans.
Hold on one second. So I'm gonna get the van map right here. I'm gonna move it a little bit. Give me 1 second so we can see it better. Okay. Here we go. I'm ready.
Okay. So the key to this map is that you see it's colored. It's all color coded. So the head haul areas is those areas, the yellow areas are the head hauls. That's where there's more freight than there is trucks. That's where the rates are higher. So it makes sense if I'm just looking at this map and I'm running vans and I live in Iowa, I probably want to stay in that upper Midwest area. I want to stay in the Minnesota. I want to stay in that yellow area. I might look at Indiana or Ohio, Kentucky, because I think that those are probably head haul states as well. But I don't want to go to Texas. Or if I do, I want to make sure that I get the money to it to that I need, because when I get to Texas, I don't have any options. When I get to Texas, there's more trucks there than there is freight. So what's that mean? It means I'm going to get a $1.25 a mile instead of $2 a mile. So it's all about it. That's how it balances itself out. So let's look at California. Let's kind of look at this map methodically. If you look at California from a van standpoint, it is a great market, and the reason for that is really pretty simple. You've got the largest port in North America in Long Beach. You've got the second or third largest port in North America in Oakland. There's a lot of import freight coming in through those ports. And does some of it get put on the rail? Absolutely, but a lot of it is shipped on trucks. I used to fly into Ontario, California, about once a month, and as I was coming, I get close enough to the ground to look out, and I saw a racetrack, and I saw a couple truck stops down there that were both enormous, but everything else was warehouses. And that stuff, all of that freight came in through the port, was put in those warehouses, and we're not talking small warehouse. We're talking about warehouses that were 500,000, 750,000, 1 million square feet, and there were dozens of them in that Inland Empire. So there's a lot of outbound freight in California. The other thing that's going on there is all the produce that's grown in Central California. Now you say, well, we're talking about vans here. Why are we talking about produce? Because produce can a lot of times van freight can also be loaded in a reefer. So it doesn't affect it a lot, but it does affect it some, because there are a high demand for van trailers in California. Now, if you look at Nevada, it's one of those odd things. Some economists put this map together. When you see that entire state of Nevada being yellow or being blue, that means it's an intermediate state. It means you're going to get an average rate there. All that means is Reno Sparks, because there's a bunch of warehouses in Reno Sparks, and that's people trying to escape, companies trying to escape California. So they, Northern California from a pricing standpoint, so there's a lot of warehouses and distribution in Reno and Sparks. Doesn't mean that the state of Nevada is your gold pot. And pretty much, other than California, everything west is going to be a backhaul state. I mean, there's always more trucks in those areas than there is freight. We'll look at Texas specifically. Texas is a big state. It's my adopted home. But there is three of the 10 largest cities in the United States are in Texas. You've got Dallas-Fort Worth, you've got San Antonio, and you've got Houston. That means there's a lot of inbound freight to support all the people that live in those cities. We're talking, do we have some manufacturing in Texas? Yes, but not nearly enough to fill up all those trucks. So that's the reason the rates are bad in Texas. So if you go to Texas, you need to make sure you get extra money, because when you come out, you're not going to make anything on that. Now let's concentrate on that upper Midwest area. I told you earlier that everything is driven by what's going on in the local economy. It's what are they making there? What do they do? How do people make their living? So if you look at that upper Midwest area, we're talking about South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas. Those are all I would say they're agriculture states. So anytime there's agriculture or manufacturing or oil and, if you're looking at the flatbed business, oil and gas or mining or timber, trees, which is really a form of lumber, there's always going to be a lot of freight there. So it's what's affecting the van rates in South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas, and Iowa, and Missouri, and Arkansas. It's agriculture. And Minnesota, there's a lot of agriculture there. Wisconsin, for those of you that have been to Wisconsin, everybody thinks of Wisconsin as being cheese, but let me tell you, there's a lot of manufacturing up in that state too. There's a lot of agriculture, but there's a lot of manufacturing there. Illinois, a lot of agriculture, a lot of manufacturing. I mentioned earlier, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, I believe, should also be yellow states. It's all manufacturing. Those states are all just have a huge amount of manufacturing base. You get down into the southeast, it's more of an intermediate. You're going to get a decent rate, but you're not going. But again, it's there's not a lot. It's about an even balance. You're going to get an average rate. Now let's look at Florida. That's a backhaul. Everybody that's driven knows that the farther south you go in Florida, the more money you need to make. Why? Because you have farther to drive north to get freight. It's non-common for truckers to drive coming out of Florida, go up to Georgia to get freight, or they get really, really cheap freight trying to get to Atlanta, where they know they can get a better load. So that Florida, there's no manufacturing there. You can't put sunshine in a trailer. You can't bottle up Disney World. It takes a lot of inbound freight to Florida. Lots of freight going to Florida because what's there? People that are on vacation and people that are retired. So there's not a lot of manufacturing there. So all that stuff that people need to live gets trucked in. So if you got to load to Florida, that's the reason you need to get a lot of money to go in, because you're not going to get a lot of money to come out. You're probably, either going to have to take a really cheap load, or you're going to have to try to get flat out deadhead up to northern Florida or Georgia to get a load, or you're going to take a really cheap load. And let's look at the East Coast. We talked about extreme backhauls. There's a lot of people that live probably 20 million people live within 50 miles of New York City. There is a huge amount of inbound freight to that area. I'm talking about New Jersey, Southern Connecticut, Eastern Pennsylvania, New York City itself, Long Island, Philadelphia. There's a lot of inbound freight there to take care of life, all the food they need, all the bottled water, all the books. I probably used to do 250 truckloads every summer of school books going in for the New York City school district, coming out of Indiana when I was at Night Transportation. It's just school books. I mean, who in the world thinks about school books? But let me tell you, and it's not just school books, it's everything is shipped in there. So what's that mean? There's lots of trucks, but when it comes time to get a load, there's lots of trucks competing for that load, so you're going to get a cheap rate. So that's the reason it's supply and demand. The shippers know that they have lots of options and they can be really choosy, which translated rates is really cheap when it comes to getting out of the East Coast. So it's all about supply and demand. So I guess for you that are operating vans, I would, depending on where you live, you need to pick a lane that works for you. Try to stay in that, be disciplined, try to stay in that lane, build relationships with shippers, build relationships with brokers that are willing to give you a little better rate because you can give them the service they need. Not all brokers are as conscious about money as they are service. I personally would rather overpay. I don't say overpay. Give somebody a fair rate and know they're going to take care of me. I don't want to have to work all day long to cover a load to make an extra $50 or $100. I'd rather just pay somebody else the money and move on and be done with it. So any questions?
Yeah. So as far as the pricing goes based on supply and demand, we know from experience, and then even someone that is not that good with economics and the way this works, most dispatchers will know that it's bad to send a truck into Florida unless it's for really great money, or to Northeast or something like that. But since they price their loads based on supply and demand, what about other factors like the value of the load, their profit margins, the specific types of products? Does that have a big effect on the price?
It should, because I tell you would. I learned, I think it's Dunn, North Carolina. I learned a really expensive lesson early in my career about trying to get a truck loaded in Dunn, North Carolina at Food Lion, and it was a 10-hour ordeal to get a truck unloaded. So I don't mess with food, and God bless the guys that do and the ladies that do. But for me to mess with food, it takes a lot. It would take a huge premium for me to put on anything on my truck that I'm going to have to charge, that I'm going to have to use that I'm going to have to either unload or use a lumper service. So I think you should charge more for food products.
Right. Well,
you should charge.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yep. As far as the value of the freight, most brokers are pretty diligent about that. They're not going to load. If you have $100,000 worth of cargo insurance, they're not going to load the load that's worth $250,000. So.
Right. And then also there, we have a couple of people here in the comment section that are saying that the state of Texas should not be red. Now, I know that sometimes, these metro areas like the Dallas, Fort Worth, Dallas area, Houston, same thing down on the coast, can be tricky. But then we have Laredo, we have Brownstown, we have all those. So I feel like Texas maybe should be divided into a couple of parts, because I don't think it's fair to label the whole state as red. What do you think?
I think that's a fair statement. There are areas where there's decent freight, and if you would flip that map over to flatbed, it would completely change, because it changed. I said earlier that changes depends on what's going on in the economy. If Texas in particular is a head haul state in flatbeds, and it's an intermediate state in reefers. In fact, part of Texas is a head haul is high demand for reefer trailers. So it kind of depends on. Texas is such a big state. I live in Dallas. If I drive to California, the halfway mark, I'm still in Texas. So it is a huge state, and I know that is what I said was a very broad statement, but I think Houston's a pretty good freight market. But I do flatbeds, and Houston is a great flatbed market.
Right.
We get good rates there. So
I was showing those maps as you were mentioning, flatbed and reefer. I was showing them for a second, but I'm back to van now.
Yep.
Those were my questions that I had so far for the van map. Do you want to switch to a flatbed?
We can, sure.
Okay. Yep, I'm showing the flatbed map right now.
So again, if you start in California, it is a head haul flatbed or van state. It is lots of van freight, lots of reefer freight. But on a flatbed, there's not a lot going on out there now. Is there flatbed freight there? Absolutely, but the rates are certainly low. And I'm gonna give you a caveat. Unless you're working the ports with flatbeds and doing some overdimensional freight, there is a lot of overdimensional freight coming in through Long Beach and Port Wainema, which is just north of there. That is a bulk freight port as well. There is some good flatbed freight there, but most of it comes out of those ports. But everything else, kind of the west is an area where there's not a lot of flatbed freight, except for Nevada. Again, Nevada is one of those tricky ones. There is a lot of mining in Nevada. I think that flatbed freight is really driven by 3 or 4 factors. This is local economy stuff. It's driven by agriculture, which also drives the demand for vans and refrigerated and reefers, but agriculture, oil and gas, mining, and ports. Ports are always drive the flatbed market. So anytime you have those in manufacturing, anytime you have those 4 or 5 things going on in the local economy, it means that there's going to be flatbed freight. So Texas, we've got a very large port, number 3, I believe, might be number 4, but that Port of Houston is a very large port. There's a lot of flatbed freight coming in and out of that port. We've also in Texas, you have the oil and gas industry. Louisiana, Oklahoma, oil and gas. You look at Louisiana also has a port. Arkansas and Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, there's a lot of manufacturing there. There is ports in Alabama and Georgia as well. Georgia has the Port of Savannah. Alabama has the Port of Mobile. Louisiana has a port in New Orleans. You've got a lot of agriculture in Iowa, Missouri. You've got heavy manufacturing in Wisconsin, in Illinois, in Indiana, and Michigan. All those states are head haul. There's lots of manufacturing. There's agriculture. There's ports. All those things that contribute to high demand for flatbeds are going on in those areas. If I'm running a flatbed, that's where I'm running is in that kind of, call it, it's not really a triangle, but it's kind of a angled square, I guess. But you want to operate in that area. That's where your best rates are. If you get into Florida, there's some decent flatbed freight in Florida. Don't know why, but there tends to be some decent flatbed freight in Florida. So you're going to get a decent rate going in. You're going to get a decent rate coming out of Florida. Pennsylvania, most people, when they think of, unless you grew up on the East Coast, most people and I grew up in Indianapolis. When I was a kid and I thought of Pennsylvania, my perception of Pennsylvania was that it was like all manufacturing, all big cities. Think of what you see on TV for Newark. I thought that was Pennsylvania, but it's not. You've got Pittsburgh on one end, you got Philadelphia on the other end with a bunch of agriculture and a bunch of farming and a bunch of little manufacturing plants throughout the state of Pennsylvania. There's a lot of flatbed freight in Pennsylvania. You've got steel coming out of Pittsburgh, but you've got lots of manufactured goods coming out of there as well. So that's a good area.
Okay.
If you flip over to refrigerated freight,
okay, give me a
start
second.
over.
Yep.
California's high demand. 70% of the fresh produce that we eat comes out of the valley in California. So huge, it's a changing season. What's in season right now is not going to be in season in 2 months, but there is always produce coming out of California. I say always. There's about a 6-week period, December, kind of the early part of December through the middle part of January, maybe 1st of February, where there's not a lot of produce coming out. But other than that, it is the best reefer market in the country. A lot of this stuff is driven. A lot of the reefer freight is driven by agriculture. It's what's growing. You got apples or watermelons or whatever is in season is where the demand for reefer trailers are. By the way, there's if you look at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, they have published some rates that they go out and talk to the farmers. And so there's always the kind of, you can go to their website and they have information on there about what the predominant rates are, the going truckload market rates are coming out of Central Valley of California, going to major metropolitan areas to give you an idea. So if you're wanting to know how if you're running a reefer but you want to get into the produce business, that's how you can kind of figure out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Texas and Oklahoma, I guess I should point this one out. If you look at that, you'll see that the panhandle of Texas, that's where Amarillo is, and the western panhandle of Oklahoma, those are both head haul states, meaning there's a lot of freight there. The rest of Oklahoma and Texas are split, split, and they're kind of an average rates. But what's going on in the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma that's going to drive the demand for trucks and truckload rates, getting higher rates? That's where the packing houses are. It's beef. That's where the packing houses are. So it's that local economy. That's what's going on in the local economy out there. There's a lot of cattle grown, and there's a lot of packing houses, and so there's high demand in those parts of Texas for trucks. So
okay, so I know that when right now I don't work with any reefers. We don't have any right now, but I used to have some reefers, and we would send them to East Coast for really good, crazy rates, right?
Yep. You
And
need
then
it. You need it.
you need it because according to this map and our experience, it's not easy to find freight from there, especially reefer freight. So we would always end up getting a a dry load just to get out
Yep.
and then come back and then do another one. So some people would would do that kind of thing. Now,
Yeah.
based on this map, now reefer is very tricky, and then same thing with flatbed. We could say because of the construction season that some of these things may change during summer, but reefer is definitely seasonal freight, so some of these will change a lot. But would you think that if someone was to do California towards Midwest and kind of up there like North Minnesota, Wisconsin, South Dakota, that they
Yep.
would just be able to do that throughout the whole year, just go back and forth and make sure they
Yes.
always end up in a head haul area?
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. You're like you said. There's about a 6-week period at the end of the year, at the end of like the middle of December through February, through the 1st of February, but there's not a lot of produce coming out of California. But you can always haul van. There's just, it slows down period in California during that 6-week period. But other than that, California is a great market for reefer.
Okay. Okay.
And that's whether you're coming out of the valley or even Southern California. There's a strawberry farm across the street from Disneyland. It sounds crazy, but there is a strawberry field across the street from Disneyland. There's one next door to Legoland in San Diego. So there is produce throughout California.
Okay.
It's not just in the Central Valley.
Well, I remember when I was driving, I was I was in South California and North California as well. I would go up and down a lot,
Yep.
and all you see is just these fields and crops, and everything is just green, and that's all you see over there. It's very interesting.
It is. It's you're in an area where there's a lot of garlic grown when you open the door to your truck and all you smell is garlic or what. And it's, all those, there's just a lot of produce there. So, and you would think, my idea of a farm, I grew up in the Midwest. My idea of a farm is, 200 or 300 acres. There's farms in California that are 2,000 acres, 5,000 acres that are, and there's tree farms. There's almonds that are grown there, huge amounts of almonds. You don't even think about that as an agriculture product, but it is. So there's peaches in California. I met a guy on vacation a couple years ago that owned a peach packing house in California. And I said to him, California? He goes, yeah, California produces more peaches than any state other than Georgia. And this guy he had a great business, and all he did was clean peaches and freeze them, cut them up and freeze them, and shipped them out. So there's lots of produce in California.
Okay. Going back to heavy haul, this is a question here from the comment section from JVC. He's always here in the live stream. Thanks JVC for being here every time. He had a question about pricing heavy hauls per axle in this market.
Yep.
So how much should you price heavy haul load per axle?
I don't have a good answer for you on that. The way that I price over dimensional is if it is a normal, I'm going to say a normal over dimensional load, something that's 10 foot wide, not going to require permits. It's not heavy. It's just a little wide. I normally charge my normal rate plus an extra, my normal rate per mile plus an extra 50 cents a mile for the truck, because the truck's going to want more money, and the permits are going to be about $50 a state. That is a general guideline for what I do on just normal, slightly over dimensional freight. If it's heavy freight, I talk to the drivers and I have them quote it, because as a broker, I'm not the one that owns the truck. On stuff that's specialized, I get with drivers and the fleet owners and ask them to price it for me. So I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer for you on that.
Okay, so there's a
Or at
lot of
least one.
factors.
There's a lot of nuance to it, and it's tough to give you a general statement on something like that.
Right. No,
But it's not uncommon to see from a RGN or double drop. It's not uncommon to see $4 or $5 a mile, and if it's permits, it's more than that.
Okay.
And if it's heavy, that's the real kicker. Over-dimensional freight isn't expensive. It's heavy freight that is expensive to move.
Right. Ken is also a regular here. He's asking if the maps were created by you.
No, they weren't. I'd tell you I would tell you that I stole them off the internet, but I don't want to be accused of thievery, but I stole them off the internet.
Okay. No, that's
years ago.
That's fine. We're just showing them here live, which is no, okay.
Yeah, but I don't. It is what it is. I don't even think that company's in business anymore. There was a company that had a rate service. I think it was called truckloadrates.com, and they had those maps on their website. And I just thought that it was a good way to visualize, the difference in the trucking rates between vans and reefers and flatbeds in the different states.
Okay, but I'm assuming since you're using them that they have worked out for you so far, and we are not posting these maps anywhere as far as the copyright go. We're just showing them here in the live stream. But do you think that a dispatcher or a carrier could use them in order to determine where to send their trucks?
I tell people to print them out and stick them up on the wall in front of them so they can visualize what they're, if you're going from a yellow area to a yellow area, head haul area to another head haul area, you're good. If you're going from a head haul area to a back haul area, a red state, you need to get some money. You got to make the money going in because you're not going to get it out coming out.
Yeah. Okay.
And the difference is $1.50. Sometimes would be $1, $1.50 a mile. That's a big difference in the rate. So. Okay.
How do you explain rate increases to shippers who push back? For example, you were telling us earlier that we are seeing a slight uptick in the rates, and hopefully that they're gonna keep going up. We don't expect anything crazy, but how would you explain that to the shippers?
Yeah, I would tell them that it is about your increased costs. The obvious ones is insurance and fuel. Those are huge things. But you also look at maintenance. I had a driver, and she had a hot shot company. So she had a one ton dually, and she had 2 or 3 trucks. And one of those during COVID, one of those trucks got sideswiped and knocked the mirror off the truck on the passenger side. And that truck was out of service for 4 months until she can get a part. So it's things like that. It's the availability of parts. It's the price of repairs. All those things factor into it. But the reality is that the costs are going up because there's fewer trucks there's fewer trucks out there. Lots of our trucking brothers have gone out of business over the last year, and it's now there's the same amount of freight, but now there's more freight. From relatively speaking, there's more freight available because there's a lot of drivers that have sold their equipment, retired, or flat out gone out of business.
What do you think? Is it because of that? Because a lot of carriers will shut down. Some old school drivers can't take this anymore. A lot of people are quitting. Yeah. Is it just because of that, or do we also see more freight coming in? Do we think the economy is improving? Is it both of those factors?
Yeah, I don't believe that, and I'm not an expert, but I've read within the last 2 or 3 weeks that it is not an increase in the volume of freight. It's just a decrease in the amount of trucks on the road. So that's what's causing there to be a slight increase. Now I think that they're at some point. I keep telling me we're going to be all making money again, or but but at some point I think it's bottomed out. I think it is. The rates are starting to go up, and as the rates go up and the economy improves, hopefully, then some of these drivers will buy trucks again and be back on the road. But I think the rates need to improve for people to be able to stay in business.
Oh yeah, well that's
But the killer is the insurance. I mean, that's the killer. Insurance is it's getting more expensive. It's not, insurance rates aren't going down. You just think about my own personal life. My car. I haven't had any accidents, and it cost me $200 a month to insure the car, and it sits. I walk to work. It sits in my driveway. It literally sits in my driveway, and I walk to my office 3 blocks. I live downtown Dallas, so I walk to work. My car sits in the driveway, and it costs you $200 a month to insure, and that's just for liability coverage. So insurance is expensive. That's the big kicker for truckers.
Yeah, we could talk about that all day with examples with down payments, and especially even if you don't have company trucks, even if you only have owner operators, there are down payments. There are other things. A lot of So it's hard to every time you have a question for insurance, hey, well, how did this happen? What's this charge? And they will always explain to you, and then they're always in the right. So you can't do anything about that.
It's I don't know, what, a couple $1,000s a month, and you got to come up with $5,000 or so to start insurance at the beginning of the year, something like that.
Yeah. Well, it depends on a lot of factors, like your if you had any claims in the past, if like how safe you are on the road, how safe your trucks are, and a lot of other things. So Emro here, we're working together here in Usora Express, and he's actually asking a question here in the live chat. Well, he's making a comment. I think inflation is doing its thing as well. Everything is more expensive. 100K value load is now in some cases 200K value load. So that might be another reason why we have better rates. Do you think?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So
I would. Yeah. It's all those factors. It's inflation. It's the cost of you doing business. I mean, I know we just talked about reasons that it goes up, that that it's about supply and demand, but from a reality, when you talk to a shipper to justify higher rates, it's the increase in price on maintenance for your truck. You can't, back in the day, you could when I was running trucks 25 years ago, you could spend, I don't know, if you needed to get a repair done on the road, you can get it done for $200 or $300. Now it's $800 or $1,000. So it's not, there's so everything has gone up, and that's real expense. I had a driver that had to get an axle repaired last week. It was $3,500 or $3,800 to get an axle repaired on his truck, and that's real money. And he said, I lost my ass on this, and yeah, he did, but it's one of those maintenance things that it's expensive to maintain equipment. So you talk about justifying your rates to your higher rates to your customers. That's certainly one way to do it.
Yeah. Well, as far as the maintenance goes, there are two things: the labor costs, because I think the labor costs have increased maybe 3 times as much as they used to be, because it used to be like less than $100 per hour for a mechanic. Now it's well over 200, sometimes even close to 300 per hour. And then these new trucks, the parts are very expensive. For example, I had last year I sold my Freightliner Coronado, but it had one of those Detroit D60 engines, a glider kit engine, that drivers love, and everything was so cheap for that truck. Like injectors, air compressor, everything. But like these brand new trucks,
and they were reliable. And they're reliable.
And they're even like, if you wanted to do an overhaul because of that, it would be much, much cheaper to do an overhaul on that engine. But now, like my brother, he has a brand new Volvo truck. He has his own truck he drives here in our authority. Like just a turbo for him would maybe cost like $5,000 just to change a
Yeah.
turbo on that truck. It's crazy. And on that Coronado, it was maybe around 1,000 or 1,200 for the
Wow.
turbo. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's an example for that. Let me see here. I wanted to ask you, how do you handle situations when carriers ask for crazy rates? Now,
Yeah. I'll tell you, I try to pay a fair rate, and I try to pay a fair rate, and I don't lowball people, and so I try to pay a fair rate, and I pretty much tell them, hey, it is what it is. I know I'm paying a fair rate. If you want it, great. If not, that's okay. I'll call another driver. So I try not to be a butthead about it, but that's kind of reality of how I deal with it. But I do try to pay a fair rate up front rather than lowballing somebody.
do you
Because
think?
lowball, all that does is get a high ball rate from the driver. I'd rather make a deal than play a game than play games.
Yeah, we have two sides. Like we maybe a broker can lowball a carrier, but on the other side, a carrier can have an unreasonable quote. So
Yeah.
it's both sides. But then, like, what's really unreasonable? Like if we see, let's say we see a lane, let's say it's 500 miles, and we see someone is paying 800, and we know that in that like let's say in Midwest, and we know that it should be paying right now at least $2 a mile, at least, that's like the
Yep.
minimum,
Yep.
because it's the new normal. Unfortunately, it would have to pay a lot more for the carrier to be profitable. Let's say we are shooting towards $2 per mile. So if that load is paying 800, and we're gonna ask for 1,000 or 1,200, broker usually they will say, well, I could do 850 or 900. But if I say
Yeah.
15 in order to get that 1,000 or 1,200, then broker might just get offended. What do you think? What's
I wouldn't worry about a broker getting offended. We can be butt heads too. So I don't know. I would say, do you want me to give you a number where we can meet in the middle, or do you want me to give you the real number?
okay?
That's really what you're trying to get to, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
It's hard to negotiate.
sometimes their shippers are just cheap, and the broker's trying to back into a number because they either move it at that $800 number, or they don't get the load. And they know that somebody's going to take that load. We mentioned earlier there's a butt for every seat. Somebody's going to take that load, and that I see this when I've got some agents that are kind of operations and sales agents for me, and the people that come from the trucking side think that, well, that's a terrible rate. I would never put that on my truck. And the key phrase is there, on your truck, because what works for one trucking company or one driver doesn't work for another. If you think about, if I'm a driver and I've told my daughter that I'm going to be home for a softball game, and I missed last week's, but I told her I'd be home for this week's game, you can bet your butt that I'm going to be home for that game no matter what. So there's a lot of, the real number might be $1,000, but I'm willing to do it for 800, because if I don't do it for 800, if I don't get that load, I'm driving home empty.
Yeah.
To go to my daughter's softball game. And so you don't always know from a broker standpoint. You can't try to run the trucker's business for them. You offer it up, and if it works, it works, and you don't hold a gun. You can't go hold a gun to their head to take it. Now, at the same time, if I've got that cheap freight, I'm rolling the dice and I can move it. And if I can't move it, then I either give it back to my customer and piss them off, or I have to go back to the customer and try to get more money for a driver. So there's every broker operates a little bit differently, I guess.
Yeah.
Some of them don't operate in a way that you would like those 3-letter guys from Cincinnati, maybe. But they've done something, because they've done something right, because it's a huge company, and they've got a lot of freight. Do they operate in a way that I probably don't agree with. Yeah, they do. I wouldn't do some of the stuff that they do, and most of us probably wouldn't, but they're successful at it. So
Okay. Okay. The trade euro is also a regular. Hey, the trade euro. He's asking how far in advance do you try to cover your loads?
yeah, I was talking to. The answer is normally a day in advance. Um, I don't like to cover the day of. I've got customers that give me that give me same day freight, but I've got carriers that are usually kind of not on standby. But I've got a group of carriers that I use for that stuff. Most of the freight that I have, I use not dedicated carriers, but I use a core group of drivers where I cover it, and they already know. They know about the freight, and I got pre-negotiated rates with them, and that stuff I can cover the same day. But normally a day in advance is what I try to do. If I wait if it's the same day and it's a load I've never moved before, I'm going to probably pay a higher. I'm going to probably pay a higher rate. Now, as a driver, you can roll that dice too. You can say, hey, I'm not going to look for a load until the same day, because I know that the brokers will be more desperate to move a load, and I can get an extra 20 or 30 or 40 cents a mile because they have to move the load. So that's a game you can play as well as a driver to try to get a little higher rate, is make yourself available in the afternoon. Does that mean if you roll the dice and you lose, you might have to lay over? Yeah, it does, unfortunately, but that's
It's
where you're at.
It's a risky game.
It is.
It depends on looking from the carrier side. It depends a lot on the dispatcher and on the driver. Here's an example. Emro is also dispatching trucks, and I'm also dispatching trucks here, and we also have Chris. Each one of us is different. For example, I like to book ahead, and then the drivers that like to book ahead, they like working with me, right? But Emro, he likes to wait until the next day in order to get the higher price. And these drivers that he works with are more patient, and they prefer a bigger profit over that safety and knowing when that they have a load, where they're going, things like that. So they don't mind that.
It makes perfect sense to me, because there's some drivers that want to know. I want to know what my next 3 loads. I'm going to, they want to be planned out to, 2 loads in advance. Hey, I'm going to pick up today. I'm going to go to Chicago. When I get to Chicago, I've got a load lined up for me, and I'm going to go to North Carolina, and we know where I can probably get a load out of Charlotte with this broker or this customer. They want to know out in advance, and that's fine. But other guys, they're okay kind of living on the edge. So nothing wrong with either one.
The result, nothing wrong with either one. And now Amir, he's gonna be glad that I'm saying this. Back when I was driving, I seem to be saying that a lot, and he noticed. So I would always prefer to have a load in advance, right? I want that peace of mind. But then, as a result of that, for example, the drivers that I dispatch, they're okay. They would rather have that in the back of their mind, peace of mind that they have a load, they know where they're going, and when they get their checks, they're happy. But then with Emro, I see that the drivers that he's dispatching, because of that, make a little bit more because of that, right? So it's either or. I guess you can't have both.
Either one.
Okay, and then I wanted to. I'm not sure how much more time you have.
I do need to get going, so we'll answer one more question.
One more question. Okay. We have 2 very interesting questions.
Well, then we'll do 2.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is very complicated, and this question is in any broker carrier discussion, it's inevitable in last couple of months, and that's broker transparency. And I know that's a really broad topic, but I did see an interesting comment here on the channel. that if such a bill is passed, or we are suddenly forced, or brokers are forced to be more transparent as far as that goes, what do you think? Will the shippers take advantage of that? Because now they know that this load, like if there is a like 20, 30, 50% profit, for the broker, now they know they can pay less, thinking, well,
Yeah.
hey, brokers, like, they're okay with 15, 20%, and now we're just going to drop our rates. Do you think the shippers would take advantage of that?
I think some of them will. But I don't know. I put a lot of value on building value to the customers. I've got a customer that has told me on several occasions that I care more about his freight than he does, and I do, because nobody. I mean, if you think about it, a small businessman, nobody takes care of, and they keep what they earn. Nobody takes care of a customer better than someone that their income is solely derived from taking care of that customer. So I think that some customers will take advantage of that, but I think that there's a decent number of them that 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 think they get a pretty good deal by dealing with a broker. I mean, it's easier for them to deal with one or two brokers and a couple carriers than it is to deal with 50 carriers. So
Okay.
it's an ease of doing business for
But
them.
what do you personally think about the transparency? Do you think that will change anything? Are you for it or against it?
I'm against it. I would never use a driver that would call that would want to see my rates and think they need to see the rates.
Okay. Okay. And then the
So,
next.
and the reality is that I pay them in 2 weeks, and some of my customers pay me in 2 months. So there's the value. So they don't know the particulars of some of those things.
Okay. Okay. I respect that. And Emra is asking another thing here about lumpers, and this we have been having a lot of trouble with lumper receipts, lumper payments from brokers. Yeah. It's hard to get paid. The lumper services will charge fees. Fees. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And then if you're working with a factoring company, if you're trying to get reimbursed for that, a factoring company will need an updated rate confirmation. And then the broker would say, well, we're waiting for our customer to approve it. Is there such a thing? Like, do you guys wait until the customer actually approves it? How does that work?
I don't move food for a reason. I've not had a lumper in 20 years. So.
Okay, so you're not familiar with that.
I'm familiar with how it operated 20 years ago, and I would know that probably the last customer I had to do lumpers with was Unilever, and out of Chicago. That was shampoo, and I don't know, lots of different bodies, like personal care, deodorant, that kind of stuff. And they would I knew that they would automatically approve lumper receipts, period. Every load we did had a lumper. So it wasn't an issue. I had to get a receipt. I had to, as a trucker, I had to get a receipt from the lumper service, and I had to submit it with my invoices, and they automatically paid it. That was honestly, an ideal situation. I don't know. I know that there's other companies that do it different, and every company has their own process or procedure. And if a broker needs to get the authorization, that's that's the customer they deal with. Customer's not always right. They're always a customer, though. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to I guess the answer to the question is that it varies by shipper.
Yeah, it varies by shipper, customer, broker.
There's no easy solution for it other than telling the broker that you don't haul food. So.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks.
And as a broker, I won't deal with food. Those of you that were on early, I don't have any hair. That's how I lost it all 20 years ago, is dealing with food. So my life is good now.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that you work mostly with flatbeds. You work with heavy haul over dimensional and not with
I
food.
do.
So
I
yeah.
I do now. I do now. That's only been in the last few years. Prior to that, I did mostly vans.
Okay. Okay. Well, I know you mentioned you have to go. This was very informational. I loved those maps. I think a lot of viewers and us as well can take advantage of those. Even though, like, when you look at it, you're like, okay, man, well, this is obvious. But then it helps you. It kind of, if you see it right there on the screen, it opens up your perspective, and then maybe it will help you in planning
Yep.
your loads.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Hey, thank you all. I appreciate your time. Thanks for letting me come and join you today.
Thank you, Jeff. I wish you all the best. And then maybe down the road, we can move some loads together.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm grateful to you guys to watch all of this and be here. He had to go. He was on the phone. Now, we tried to do this live stream with him on a camera, but he has some issues with his connection. We started streaming first, and then his camera and his audio would just freeze up. So I had to switch to this. But we were able to speak on the phone. Thank you, everyone, for watching every time. Next Monday, I will be having another guest here, another broker, and then they work with door-to-door service. So they work with containers, with ships, with ground transportation. So they would transport a container from one continent to another one, and then they would just deliver it door to door. So he will explain to us how that works. It will be interesting. Thank you, Running Warrior. Thank you, Detroit Euro. Thank you, everyone else, for being here. And then I'll try to bring Emro and Chris soon, and maybe we can have some discussions here. And then I'll try to do more dispatching videos as well. Thanks, everyone. See you guys later. Come back for more.